This is the Neurosurgery Podcast.
Welcome back to the Neurosurgery Podcast. Hello, Dr. Wang. A belated Merry Christmas and an early Happy New Year to you and all of our listeners. We've been doing this every year since we started the podcast, a little year in review, wrap up New Year's episode. And so it's exciting to be here again and look back at 2024, which for us, for the world, for the country was a pretty eventful year, I'd have to say. But hi, and there you are again calling in from the hospital. How are things?
Great, and a happy Christmas to you. Christmas and Hanukkah overlapping. It's still Hanukkah. We're in the midst of it, and yeah, it's and Kwanzaa started, I think, last night. So it's been a fantastically newsworthy year, and we have so much to talk about for people who've been living under a rock. JP, start us off. Let's do the year in review.
Yeah, so my plan for this little conversation is that we'll talk about the world first and then kind of zoom in and talk about us and our lives and our work and the podcast and how much growth and new territory we've covered with the show in this past year. All thanks to all of you at home who have been listening to us for years and now hopefully watching too. But to first look out at the world as a whole, man, 2024, where to begin? Let's talk assassinations. We talked on this podcast about two of the biggest assassination related events in this past year, an attempt on the now president-elect Donald Trump and a successful assassination of a healthcare insurance company CEO. Who would have seen that coming when we're ringing in 2024? It put me in mind, as I always do. I went back and I listened to last year's New Year's episode that we did. And one of the biggest things that you were talking about after completing your MBA was the changes to third-party payer structures, difficulty getting patients out of the hospital to rehab, and all this new frustration and struggle with the insurance companies. Clearly, you were tapping into something because that seems to have come to a head. I mean, you've been in the healthcare game for decades now. Would you ever have guessed that something like that would come across our newspaper headlines?
Yeah, it's not clear yet how this is going to play out or even what this was really all about, right? We don't even really have the data yet, but it is I mean, it's got to be like a Lifetime movie, right? It's already set up to
Yeah.
be sold to be a novel or a movie or miniseries. So much going on, and let me just add to the assassinations. There was an interesting article that came out this week talking about how the number one cause of death in an airliner is now by missile. And if we go back a little bit to a couple supposedly accidental shooting down of
Hmm.
airliner, mostly happening near the southern border of Russia. But of course, people have their own theories about the Malaysian airline. And then just last week, of course, Azerbaijan lost an airplane, Azerbaijan Air, that was, they believe, was taken down in either a drone strike or an anti-drone countermeasures strike by accident, it's believed, right? The fact that this is going on today is really, I think, brought us to a whole new, I don't want to say dystopian, but definitely a shift change universe from when we were younger. For the people growing up now, this has got to be, I mean, I don't want to say it's normalized, but this is certainly quite odd that there are assassinations, that there are jetliners taken out of the sky by missile, that I don't want to say wars normalized, that the length of the wars are very long. Like if you look at the length of time that the Ukraine war has been going on, and you think about how short even World War II was, right, and how long the Afghanistan or Iraq wars were. Are we reaching a new normalization just of violence in society? Like, what do you think, JP? I mean, you have a high 40,000 foot view of this. What is happening to our world and our culture?
Well, I mean, to make the obligatory Orwell reference from 1984, war is peace. And Big Brother kept everything in a state of perpetual war as a means of controlling the population, controlling the culture, controlling the means of production, and the allocation of resources towards the war front. It's an easy justification to control all the factories and the goods, at least in that world. Um, I think a lot of that normalization and the constancy of some kind of conflict or war that we're in now is and this is not some fancy idea of mine. This is things I read from scholars, is that we have this separate military class of citizens now, and the average citizen, be they an educated specialist like you and I, or an average Joe on the street, people at home raising their kids, we're so separated from these conflicts, and we don't have skin in the game directly. We have money on the line, but there's a whole separate class and caste even within our society that goes out and actually fights. And we've been honored in this past year to talk to many of them who've come on the show and talked about their experiences in war zones, experiences coming back and pursuing medical training now after the things they've seen there, conflicts in the past and ongoing. That it's easier for the population to not demand an end to the conflict because our sons and daughters, brothers, sisters are not the ones being sent out by and large.
Yeah, exactly. The concept of the citizen soldier has been replaced by the professional soldier, right? And you see
Yeah.
the recent influx of troops from North Korea to the Russia side of the Ukraine war, right? I mean, that's the ultimate mercenary scenario that we have not seen, I think, in many, many decades. I mean, tens of thousands of North Korean men showing up in the Ukraine, right, fighting that war. And one can argue whether they're effective or not, but they're humans, right? They're humans.
Yeah.
And then you see what you saw the recent news from the Chinese on their militarized robots, right? This is really like a Black Mirror kind of situation, right?
Yeah.
And so you think about what that means, and then you translate it to our world. And so here we are. We had on the podcast, right, recently, surgeon soldiers talking about um, the type of damage done to the human body that
Yeah.
they're seeing nowadays, very different than wars in past years.
Right. And I mean, so I was actually just thinking to myself, our poor audience tuned in to hear us talk about spines and neurosurgery and how much we love our job, and we're talking about wars. Happy New Year. But obviously, this world and these events are the context in which we're all living and raising families and going to work. And I think these are things that we all have to think about and at least pay attention to for two reasons. One, I say this constantly. You have to be a good person to be a good doctor. You have to be a good doctor to be a good surgeon, and you have to be a good surgeon to be a good neurosurgeon. So to just close your eyes and try to ignore all these things that are um, true, deep causes of human suffering, I think is antithetical to being a good physician and being in our specialty, even if in our day to day jobs we don't really touch this conflict. But then also, we have to remember how privileged we are to practice medicine the way that we do. If a conflict like that or a true war really came to our shores or really started to tax our economic system beyond just a constantly increasing debt and actually started taking our resources, neurosurgery, aside from trauma cranies on the battlefront, we're going to be early on the chopping block. If there were actual conflict, true war that came to our nation and our population, we're not doing surgery for pain anymore. We're going out in the front lines, setting broken bones. We practice a very specialized and privileged kind of medicine because we can do so in a state of stability and peace. And so anything that threatens that intrinsically threatens our profession, our very way of life.
Yeah, and I think for people who don't listen regularly to you and me on this podcast, they may not understand why we have so many episodes. Maybe over 10% of our episodes are related to the military or military adjacent, right? And
Mm,
the thing is, think about it from two sides. One is that if you look at the hundreds of thousands of people being injured in the Ukraine war, and I don't want to upset people about this other war happening in the Middle East as well, and now with Syria. I don't want to make it all about Gaza, but that's a very, very complicated topic we don't really want to dive too far into yet. But the point is, people are being killed, right? People are being killed on
yeah,
both sides. And a lot of people are going to come out wounded with head injuries, with spine injuries, peripheral nerve injuries. So are we going to be caring for these individuals, right? Are we as Americans or world citizens of practicing neurosurgery going to be caring for these people? And the answer is, of course, yes, right? We are going to be caring for these people. And the second part, and I don't want to make it sound like um, we're trying to seek advantage in an inopportune situation, but if you look at Harvey Cushing, much of Harvey Cushing's formative surgical training and development happened during World War One.
Mhm.
And so, are we in the meantime also utilizing this opportunity to learn about the brain and the spine and how it heals and how to heal it and how to repair it, just like they did during World War One and World War Two and the Vietnam War? Medicine does tend to advance in the setting of war because that is, I don't want to call it an experimental form of trauma, but you could use it as a live laboratory, so to speak. And I don't want people to take that out of context, right? Obviously, war is horrific, but war demands solutions. And so, if neurosurgeons have this opportunity to create new ways of engineering or technical feats to try to piece back damaged bodies, that is important in our field as well, right? So, those two dimensions really matter for us in military conflict.
Yeah, and in fact, to sort of telegraph a little bit about what I want to discuss later for directions to take the show in this coming year, I think the reason we talk to so many members of the military is because we're specialists with a profession, and they're specialists with a profession. And any kind of technical person, I think, intrinsically enjoys talking to another technical person because even if it's worlds apart, like neurosurgeon and professional soldier, we can meet in the middle on the I've spent years honing a very particular skill and practicing and dedicating myself to that craft. How did you learn your thing? Well, how did you learn your thing? And we can meet in that middle. And so I think we'll talk a little bit later. It might be interesting in this next year to reach out to other sort of specialists in other professions and see if we can also meet in that middle. But also, I would say why we've talked to so many people who go to the Ukraine and not to elevate that conflict and importance over any other ongoing conflict. To anyone out there who doesn't have a podcast, these are just the people we happen to know. So
Yeah.
the people we happen to know who we can ask to come on the show and talk to us, that's where they've gone. So if anyone out there wants us to talk about another conflict or has been to another war zone and wants to come tell us about it, we'll talk to anyone. But so far, the people we happen to know who we can invite on the show, they've been going to the Ukraine. So we're happy to discuss any issue. And in fact, I would love to talk to someone who's gone to Gaza or gone to any other active war zone and hear about that firsthand. But so far, the practicalities of running this show is that it's a matter of who's in your Rolodex, not that maybe half of our listeners know what a Rolodex is.
Well, let's bring it back to Luigi Mangione because we had an early
Mm,
podcast right after he was captured, and this has really started to evolve. I remember when this first occurred, the discussion was this is going to be and not to obviously it's horrific that Brian Thompson was killed. Right, nobody deserves to be gunned down in that way, and obviously his family and society is the worst for all this. But we were talking about how wow maybe this is going to change how prior authorization happens, and I'm on a peer-to-peer every single day basically dealing with insurance companies frustrated trying to get care for patients that I believe and the patient believe is necessary and medically mandated to restore their health. And then the next thing you know it turns around, it's like, oh my god, is the spine surgery the source of his anger? And then there's his journal, which seems to indicate in a couple lines at least that he benefited greatly from the surgery. And then there's all the commentary from people on other podcasts saying the surgery was done poorly. Like, let's go a little deeper into this because a lot has happened in the weeks since we had that podcast.
yeah, you know, I'll just go out and put my take out. I think that guy's an idiot. And it annoys me because you're seeing all these takes online that, oh, he was so well read. And they looked at his Goodreads list on the internet and read some posts and journal entries he had about books. And he seemed to have erudition and write very well about these books that he read. I don't care. I think if you gun down another person in cold blood like that on the street, you're automatically stupid in my book because I think that everyone's so obsessed with IQ, and we talked before about the neurosurgery quotient, like getting things done. I think there has to be some kind of moral or pragmatic dimension to assessing if someone is smart, quote unquote, or not smart, quote unquote. And I don't care how he scores on an IQ test. I don't care what books he's read. I don't care if he writes wonderful, incredibly well written essays about those books. He made that decision And so automatically to me, that is morally depraved, and even at a pragmatic level to try to think that he's going to affect a healthcare system, if that was his actual motivation, by murdering a father of two in cold blood, dumb in my book.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't disagree with you. What do you make of all this discussion about? I mean, it seems almost like America, or a certain percentage of Americans, are willing to give people the pass on doing horrible things if they're attractive, right? Like the Menendez brothers, right?
Yeah.
Luigi's just the latest version of this. But what do you think? Is that there's something very animalistic about that too?
Well, what's interesting, and that's not a privilege I've ever enjoyed. But uh, what's interesting is this will be like the Kennedy Nixon debate, where the people watching on YouTube and the people just listening will have a totally different take on that joke. Um, but uh, what's interesting about that is that the you say the people are willing to give him a pass, and I'm pretty active on X, which there may be some siloing and whatnot, but in general, it's kind of a wild west of all sorts of people saying all sorts of things. And especially if you search by a topic or a subject, you get less filtering in terms of like just the people you normally hear from. You can see what's really out there if you look for it. And then there's conventional media, or what now they're calling mainstream media or traditional media, or what have you. And when you say the people seem to give him a pass because he's attractive, or perhaps because they agree with him gunning down the greedy CEO. There is some of that on the general internet, but I think we have to, I can't put numbers on it, but I think we have to distinguish how much is the actual people thinking a certain way or giving someone a pass versus the media who find something photogenic or have a narrative that they want to pursue, either because they think it'll sell and it's a good headline, or if you think they have some nefarious motives. And so for me at least, it's always hard to suss out, and that's why I'm not going to say my opinion because I don't know, but I think we should acknowledge that there is almost certainly a difference between the prevailing media headline and what the majority of Americans actually think about it.
But regardless of that, right, and the percentages, if all the late night talk show hosts and these comedians are mentioning it in this light for impressionable young people, teenagers and
Yeah.
the like, the message is the same, right? The message, even if it's tongue in cheek, is that, hey, this is kind of the way culture can be, right? And I just find it fascinating because I'm thinking about it from the neuroscientific standpoint. Is like, what does that mean about the workings of our brains? And what if an AI is watching us saying, if this is really how humans think, then the way to manipulate humans or the way to control humans is quite clear, right? I mean, it's quite clear, for example, that if you look at all the presidential races in the past umpteen, centuries, right? The taller person often wins, right?
Yes.
Taller people make more money, for men at least, for men, right? Men that are taller, over 6'2", make more money than almost any other category, right? So there's these built-in
That's why I have so much debt.
there's it's so fascinating to me because like we are in this age when there's like a lot of discussion about like what's your race, what's your gender, what's your height, what's your whatever, right? And what are the mutable parts? And it fascinates me to no end. Like if two people are put on trial, one person gets outcome A, another person gets outcome B. And I think there's a legitimate gripe on the side of the people who say, I'm just uh, you know, disadvantaged in terms of my likability or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to get this short, and I'm sure a lot of people feel that way. It's like I just seem to get the short end of the stick. The cops stop me, and I get the short end. I was talking to you before we signed on about applicants.
Yeah.
Like, how sad is it that like when we're talking about applicants, and this is like the private part, that people actually bring this up? They're like, "Oh
Yeah.
my god,
Well,
that person's overweight," or whatever, you know?
yeah. Well, I mean, there's good evidence about this, and Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot. Imagine being really, really, really ugly, like deviations from the norm, not just plain looking or normal looking,
Quasimodo.
and right, not just not Brad Pitt, but like actually ugly. And he talks about, imagine going through childhood with a really unattractive face, And he says, imagine that no one ever smiles when they see you. What does that do to a developing brain? And again, we're talking in generalities and
Oh,
being
it's
a
real.
little
It's absolutely a real
right.
thing.
Right, like, I'm being a little glib about it just for ease of conversation, but imagine, through no fault of your own, you have some appearance that is unattractive, and when you're a kid, no one ever smiles when they see you. What does that do to a developing personality? And I think your point is well taken about how this, Luigi character is being, in some cases, lionized by the press. Think about how we would have handled that 2,000 years ago. He'd be hung in Times Square. A thief's hand is cut off, a murderer is killed publicly to teach directly to the population, if you do this, this is what happens. And now these young people are seeing, well, he did this, and this is what happens. He's being praised and lionized, and these dramatic photos of him looking really good are being published. So your point is well taken that perhaps particularly with some of the younger consumers of media, uh, there might be some unattended knock-on effects of the way that this whole story is being told. But it's interesting that as part of that you mentioned AI, because that's probably the other biggest thread to follow through 2024. um, the promise of AI, much like the promise of machine learning 5 years before it, is supposed to reconstruct our society, turn medicine on its head, completely restructure the financial and economic systems of the world. And so far, we have really good search engines, and we can generate pictures and videos, and so that's really good. We're making progress there. But AI was a big year, a big influence this year for the world and for science and medicine, but also for the show and for us. I think my former boss, Dr. Byrne, left Rush to go down to Mayo Jacksonville largely to pursue his research interests in artificial intelligence. We had a number of episodes with experts talking about artificial intelligence. I wrote a great essay with Dr. Anthony DiGiorgio, our friend and multiple time guest on this show, that was published in Fox about AI in medicine. Um, you're actually out there practicing while I'm still in training. Has AI found its way into your clinic or operating room yet? Is it in your world at work?
Yeah, it absolutely has. I mean, unfortunately, currently in its iteration, AI is working against us because the big insurance companies, going back to United Healthcare situation, now what they do is instead of employing nurses to go through reams and reams of patient data, so now we have EMR, right? So we know that. I mean, this is going to get a little controversial, but when President Obama passed the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, one of the biggest giveaways was literally trillions of dollars to Cerner and Epic, right? So Madison,
Mm-hmm.
Wisconsin grew. The nurse that runs the company Epic made a gazillion dollars. The Epic system we use at our smaller hospital cost $100 million 10 years
Mm-hmm.
ago, and it's got recurring costs for maintenance. It's not a great software program. Think of all the 3,000 hospitals in America that have to buy $100 million worth of software, and it's not like Microsoft Office. It's not that good, and you don't own the data. Epic owns the data. So as you're clicking boxes, you're basically training their AI to be smarter about how to replace you. Is the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I push back so hard against the EMR. It's like this is just a way of using our brains to train their eventual AI. And if you
We
don't,
wrote an essay about this when I was in medical school with you. We're being
that's right.
forced to train our replacements.
We are absolutely being forced to train our replacements, and we're paying for it too, not just
Yep.
in time, but through taxpayer dollars. And that is horrific to me. Not that I don't think that EMR is better than paper, it's the way it's being energized. And so, in the past, when insurance companies are trying to deny you care, what they would do is someone would have to go through 5,000 pages, and now it's 50,000 pages of EMR. Now the AI searches, and if you have any mention of smoking like 25, 70 years ago, whatever, it flags it immediately. And then basically it's all directed towards denial, right? It's not like,
Yeah.
how do we get a better solution for better chemotherapy for you? It's just a way of just saying, look, we deny this, we don't think you're doing the right thing, et cetera, in an effort to restrict care, ration care, pay less money, save more money from the premiums to invest, because they have the economy of scale to do it. So in the spine contingent of neurosurgery, so spine section is probably the most powerful group. We've talked about, we need to have our own AI abilities to push back. But look, what are we going to do? Spend $1 million on it? That's a lot of money for us. the insurance companies are spending probably hundreds of millions, if not billions, on it right now. There's no, it's a war of money, right? It's a war of resources. There's no way in the AI world to beat them at their game. When they're going to spend $100 million, they're going to spend 50,000, right? It's just not possible. And they have the data. It's
Yeah.
not like Rush University can say, we're going to do a study on all the spinal fusions we did, and we had 5,000 cases. They have all the data, right? And so it is a losing proposition. And I don't think patients understand this. I don't think they understand. And this is where I'm going to say, this Luigi Mangione thing, even though everything he did was wrong, maybe it draws some attention, like in a really bad way, to this inflection point in the insurance industry that happened already. It already happened. And we have no way as surgeons to battle it except through our patients, except through talking to our patients. There's no other way. And we talked about that as well in this podcast, that are we going to be inferior? And we already are at talking to patients compared to AI.
Yeah, and I mean, much like you mentioned, Harvey Cushing learning neurosurgery from a war zone, this craven act of murder by Luigi Mangione. I mean, it can be evil, and we could still draw good from it if it puts a spotlight somewhere. That doesn't mean it was good. That doesn't mean it was justified. But we can always try to pull some good or some lesson from any event, even as evil as that.
Well, I want to segue there because it draws us back to the Gooby Dooby thing.
Oh
And
yes.
I'm going to stick to my guns on this. I think that this is something that's been popularized by algorithms, maybe a little bit of the Maha movement, just a touch of the Maha, but the Maha movement's also energized by their own, industries, AG1, chiropractic care, stem cell institutes, all that, to push back against us, to get people not to have spinal surgeries. Not that everybody needs a spinal surgery, but there's some that need to, that won't get it because of all that. So that is definitely part of a situation that is happening. And shout out to my good friend Joe Chen at USC, who told me, this Maha movement is a big deal. He told me that 6 months ago. What do you think about that and the government? So we just passed an election last month. Um, we see the proposed members of the I don't want, it's not just the cabinet, but the director of HHS, the director of NIH, the director of CDC. This is going to have potentially some impact because of the philosophical divide between what we do as neurosurgeons and how the government, which pays for something like a third of all healthcare, I think, in America right now. What do you think of that, JP?
I think there's a lot of potential for good, if only because it at least promises to be a shakeup. And I think that our current healthcare system, economically and with its ties to the government, is really ossified and needs a shakeup. Obviously, that could go for the worse, but I think that just by the very nature of an entirely new group of people with a new philosophy, if there's a lot of firings, rehirings, restructurings, change in this case is necessary and good, like a cleansing fire in the woods of California. Um, I mentioned before on the show that we on X do this recurring space pretty much each week with Dr. DeGiorgio, a couple other physicians, Anish Koka and Sanat Dixit, another neurosurgeon. And we talked about a few of these cabinet picks and how it might impact the healthcare system here in the country. We did that a couple months ago, just after the election, when they were starting to announce some of these cabinet picks. And my view then is similar to now, mostly optimistic. I think that most of the initiatives and at least big ideas they're talking about don't directly touch neurosurgery and our little corner of the healthcare system, except maybe in, if they put some focus on the administrative burden in hospitals and the administrator to physician ratio, both in terms of sheer numbers of employees and also the compensation and where the money is going. Um, but if some of these initiatives that they're trying to do actually bear fruit in the long term for the overall health of the population, then we would have healthier patients. And then when those people actually need surgery, we'd be able to do them more safely and more effectively,
Do you
with
want to
fewer
you want to
complications.
tell people the link to X where you have those conversations? It'd be nice for people to follow that.
Yeah, I'll post it in the show notes for this. The way they don't save like regular podcasts, but they're saved on usually Anish Koka's X page, and so I'll link to him as well as to the space where we discuss these things in the show notes, whether you're listening or watching this.
And
But then
spell his name for the listeners.
Anish, and Koka is Koka. He's got a big following on X. I did an episode on this podcast with him and Dr. DeGiorgio a few weeks ago. He's a cardiologist in Philadelphia, really great thinker on healthcare economics and public policy. But the biggest hope, I guess you would say, that I had with the shakeup is that more so than the direct healthcare interventions, is that if they actually shake things up with the economy and put more money in people's pockets, then perhaps that might trickle into the healthcare sector where, if people actually do eat better and afford more leisure time and they aren't so pressed and stressed and have more spending power to pursue the things they want to do and the care that they want to receive, that might trickle into the healthcare system where if people are just doing better generally, they'll be doing better medically.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's all very positive. I do worry a little bit about RFK Jr. and maybe Joe
Hmm.
Rogan's philosophies. Not that I disagree with them fundamentally, but I think Joe Rogan fairly regularly talks about spine surgery with a very jaundiced perspective from him.
Stem cells.
Yeah, stem cells. And of course, he's talking about young people who are healing themselves. And then after they get their stem cells, they have to lay still for 3 months and not move. I bet you if you just laid still and didn't do anything for 3 months, you probably heal yourself most of the time, anyways.
Yeah.
And occasionally a guest will push back and say, no, I had spine surgery and I got a lot better. Elon Musk has had multiple neck surgeries. That I don't know if will weigh positively or negatively for us. But I think it's an interesting thing because in the end, you're right. Like, if we're operating on healthier people and there are fewer people to operate on, that's actually good for the populace. But I do worry that a lot of folks that actually need care might delay it unnecessarily and end up becoming addicted to opiates or lose their
Yeah.
livelihood or end up divorced or whatever, right? And again, cautionary note, spine surgery is reserved for a very select population of people. The flip side, of course, is that Elon will likely energize a lot of the functional neurosurgery aspects, maybe some of the
Yes.
endovascular realm, right? That's very exciting for neurosurgeons writ large. I worry a little bit for the cancer oncologist, the neuro-oncologist, because the feeling that like if you just live the right life, you're not going to get a GBM kind of thing,
Right.
right? That worries me a bit too. But I think the bottom line is it'd be nice to have an open line of communication with folks at every level. So for the neurosurgeons out there, keep those lines of communication, even if you're on the opposite side of politics of this administration. I think keeping that communication open. I've talked to a lot of folks who work with NIH, and they're very scared. But rather than be scared, just be proactive, right? Just be discussing, and it's probably likely that because of the narrow House majority, that some of these giant changes that people are afraid of probably won't come to pass. It just doesn't seem like I mean, I'm being a little bit, cynical, right? Even if they're positive changes, a lot of stuff is going to get bogged down through the bureaucracy and the legislature and the judiciary. I think that's my gut instinct on this.
Yeah. Well, I think now let's pivot and get to the fun stuff.
Yeah, let's do it.
Now that we've talked about the world and weighty issues long enough, let's look back on our conversation last year, the resolutions we made, and see how we did, and then talk a little bit about 2025 and the year to come. So I always go back and review these things, and so last year, you had started rounding alone. And that was previously you had talked about doing like teaching rounds and bringing the residents around, and then instead you did a full 180 and started rounding completely alone. And so I want to follow up on how your rounding practices have changed, and then also your resolution for 2024 was to take an extra 10 seconds or few minutes with each patient and try to get into that kernel of truth and that nugget of the real problem that brought them in. So how did 2024 go for those?
So I just rounded just now, and I kind of screwed it up. Um, I I listened to our podcast from last year, so I will tell you on the latter, I've succeeded. I think that I'm actually being a slightly better doctor in terms of getting
Okay.
down into the weeds with what their lives are like. I had a very difficult conversation just this week on Monday with a long-standing patient of mine. I've known her for over a decade. I operated on her
Wow.
when I first arrived in Miami. I operated on her again last year, and I'm not going to divulge the name. And she was very despondent in my office, and it was partly, she was better from the surgery, but she wasn't as better as she thought. And the reason is because her husband, who had always come to clinic with her, and he made leather belts for me. That wasn't his profession, but he would give me a new belt every time he saw me, and they were beautiful. I wore them. I still wear them to this day. Is dying of pancreatic cancer, stage 4, and
Oh.
I spent the clinic visit not talking about her X-rays and her spine, although I gave her whatever she needed. I spent 30 minutes talking to her about what she should do about her husband. She asked me for my advice about whether she should put him in hospice, home hospice, live in hospice, go into chemotherapy, all this stuff. And I tried to really get deep with her to help her. She started crying. She had nowhere to turn. She had a friend with
Mm.
her, and her friend had had a bad experience with home hospice, so was trying to talk her out of it. But I had known this man for over a decade, so I spent the time talking to her about her husband, who is not my patient. I felt like that's probably the most important 30 minutes I spent this week, even though I did lots of surgery this week. But on the other front, I think I'm failing. I just spent 20 minutes haranguing, yelling at our residents and fellows because they were they were providing me unsatisfactory answers on rounds, and I never do this. I never ask on rounds, and you're not supposed to pimp now, right? This wasn't really pimping. I was asking questions, and I had asked questions yesterday in the OR, and I quizzed them on did they actually read about what I asked them about. And I never do this. All year I haven't done this, and I was just so displeased, I think, with their level of this is what I did. Can I tell the quick story? So I asked them many questions about things that I thought they should know, basic stuff on spine. These are PGYs 7, 8, right? They're 8 years out of medical school, 7 years out of medical school, and then we had a sub-I here who I had higher hopes for. And then we had two we went through two cases, and we were like, I was like, oh my god, you got all these questions wrong. They're all wrong. None of your questions are answered correctly. And I went across the hall to an orthopedic surgeon's room, and I asked orthopedic spine surgeon, I asked him the same exact questions, and I brought a witness with me, and he got 80% of them right. And I was so despondent this morning that when I came in the round, that I was like, oh my god. Okay, so here's what I think people need to do that are listening, for the young people. You need to read more. And you
Mm.
need to read not on the internet, because I realized that all their answers to the questions were related to product. I'm like, what's Dr. Affelbaum known for? They're like, his retractor. I'm like, no, 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 no. That someone's selling the retractor, so that's what you found because that's a product, right? That's a commercialized product. So it made me very upset that I was like, the only source of information you're getting is coming from someone feeding you information that they're trying to sell you something. You
Mm.
didn't read his papers, you didn't read what he wrote. You're And it made me very concerned. Now this next generation is getting the digested format, meaning the filtered format of information that's intended to sell stuff. In the same way people are getting the format, don't have a fusion because you'll get adjacent level disease, which was a format designed to sell disc replacement, right? That was a lot. It's not that it's not some kernel of science there. It's that that is being promulgated because people want you to not have a fusion or surgery, or they're trying to sell you a disc replacement, right? We all
Yeah.
understand that because we're sophisticated, but the patient doesn't understand that. But that's what they're receiving on the information side. So I'm sorry, I've digressed a bit, but that's what happened this morning. So the answer is I'm 50-50.
Well, that's really interesting, because I do that too. Ever since I became a PGY2 and had junior residents, I think with almost every resident junior to me at Rush, at some point when they were an intern, I asked them a question. And if they didn't know the answer, I said, okay, I'm going to ask you this again later. Know the answer later. And then, like, end of the day or the next day, I'll ask them again and see if they took the time to look it up. And they hate it. They hate me
I
for it
hate it.
because they're busy as hell like you. And I ask them later and they go, "Oh no, I've just been swamped. I had all these consults." I go, "Okay." But there's a few people who have done it who, like me, pragmatically immediately just walk away, immediately look it up, and then just have it ready to go whenever I ask. But that's something I do where if they don't know it, I go, okay, I'm going to ask. And I warn them, I'm going to ask you again later. Know it when I ask you later.
But I thought I
But
was being unreasonable. I'm like, how is it possible none of you guys know this? Until I walked into an orthopedic surgeon's room, and this is not an
right,
this is a very young attending who worked with me as a medical student, and so he's in his first year out, right? So he's a PGY 7.
yeah,
He did 5 years of residency, 1 year of fellowship. Is his first year out, so he's a PGY 7, right? He's not a
yeah,
resident anymore, but he's postgraduate year 7, and he knew 80% of the answers. I was like, holy
yeah.
shit! Like, are we failing our own? It's to we're to I'm to blame. Are we failing our own trainees now? That's the
Well,
question.
then that's what last year when we talked about your rounds, I said maybe you should do like once a month. You should do teaching rounds where you bring everybody and ask questions and stuff. So it sounds
Nobody's
like
going
you
to
just
show
did.
up. Nobody's going to come.
They have to. You're the boss.
Yeah, yeah. What,
But
what happens at Rush? Besides you, are you the only person? John O'Toole must do this, right? John O'Toole or Vince Trinellis, they must do this, right?
they ask questions while we're operating. Yeah, most of the time that we talk about stuff is while operating. Like I was telling you last year, they tend to round alone as well. Dr. Byrne used to grab the junior on call around with him, but mostly they round alone and then talk to the chiefs later and stuff. But when we're operating, we talk a lot about, I mean, all sorts of stuff, but certainly what we're doing, the history of it, the indication. So we get that time with them in the OR mostly. Um, well, that's good then. So I think you should do that at least maybe once or twice a month. You should round with everybody and ask them these things and tell them these things that you think they aren't getting.
What about
Um,
you? How about your resolutions?
well, my resolution last year was to put more time and attention into the things I'm not interested in doing for my career. And I think I'll give myself a B, maybe a B minus on that. I have taken more time to read about stuff that's outside of my professional interests, pursue those cases, and anyone who's a surgeon is a surgeon, and surgery is surgery. So even if it's not something I want to do for my profession and my specialty interest or whatever, a good surgery is a good surgery, and so you can have fun with it, engage with it, learn, and enjoy the execution of it. I give myself the B minus because man, I still need to do my angios. I'm I'm like I'm I'm a PGY 6.5 now, and I still need to get my numbers for the angios, and that's I think a lot of people carry this cross, and I'm right there with them. But the angios I'm going to try to get by the end of this academic year, so it's smooth sailing when I'm a PGY 7. But that I'll knock myself down for that one.
How many do you have to
Um,
do?
I think it's like 30 or something, and then some are diagnostic, some treatment. I don't even I have blinders on. I don't even want to think about it. And I'm sorry to everybody listening. I'm sure there's stuff that I love to do that you feel the same way about, but I need to get it done. I need to buckle down and get it done. It's a constant struggle. Um so then what looking forward to 2025, what are the resolutions going to be for this year? And again, we all may have life resolutions and things, but we always do professional, workplace, neurosurgery resolutions.
So I can tell a story that relates to neurosurgery that happened at the CNS meeting. Um, I had a very concerning meeting with the industry because Jacques Morcos, and so Jacques Morcos is president of the AANS. His meeting will be in
Hmm.
Boston. It'll be amazing in April. Look forward to
Yes.
seeing you there. Um, I had a meeting with a company that sells endovascular products, and of course, I don't do endovascular like you, right? So I don't know anything about these people, and they don't know
Right.
me, right? They know nothing about me, and so I sit down and I'm talking to the endovascular people. This is the company people, the people that sell the products, make a ton of money, billions of dollars or hundreds of millions a year, selling
Yeah.
endovascular products, and one of the big companies too. And of course, the plea is, you need to support neurosurgery, double ANS. And the person, the executive says to me, well, listen, Dr. Wang, I don't really know you, and I know you don't do endovascular, but I got to tell you something that I do not think the future is with neurosurgery. All right. Now, I haven't told you this before, have I?
No.
And it put me into a fit, right? And we got in a discussion, not an argument, we got in a discussion. And then later on, a lot of the other company people from that organization apologized to me, saying that person never should have said that to you. I'm like, no, 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 hold on a second. When I was in Houston at the CNS meeting, I started to lose a lot of sleep thinking about this, not because I am an endovascular surgeon. And I hope people listening, some of you do endovascular, want to do endovascular. It occurred to me that he might be correct. And then Adam Arthur, my good friend Adam Arthur's voice rings in my head saying, Mike, you know that we are going to own everything. We're going to be the highway to the brain. All functional will go through endovascular. All tumor will be intraarterial chemotherapy, blah, blah, blah,
Mm,
blah, right? It'll be all focus ultrasound and endovascular, right? That's what he's telling me.
right.
And I'm like, wow. So you're saying to me that all of neurosurgery other than spine and maybe trauma will be endovascularly oriented. And this guy who sells this stuff is saying that we aren't going to own that roadway. And it occurred to me that we might be headed for a real problem. Then I had a conversation at the same meeting with the director of one of the largest endovascular fellowships who told me that, Mike, listen, you're barking up the wrong tree because half of my trainees end up only doing spine anyways.
Mm,
Now, so my project for 2025 is weird. It is going to be Bobby Stark, who's one of our endovascular specialists, and I are going to try to raise awareness to figure out how to get you to do more angiograms. Because maybe Adam Arthur is correct when he came on our podcast that we all need to learn how to do thrombectomy, including myself, and I need to do one or two or more when I'm on call. But we need to potentially not lose endovascular to neurology. And
yeah.
nothing against the neurologists. But the problem is the neurologists make a lot more money when they do endo, so you don't have to pay them much to do it. The neurosurgeons, you have to pay a lot of money and they don't want to take so much call.
Yeah.
So the optics from a business perspective are obvious. A hospital can hire 3 neurologists for the cost of 1 neurosurgeon and get full stroke coverage. So we have a problem. And I don't know how to circle this square yet, but I will say that this may be the biggest forthcoming challenge we as an organization have to face. And the great thing about neurosurgeons is every 10, 15, 20 years, neurosurgery reinvents itself to remain dominant. For example, when spine became a priority.
Hmm.
And this is not a selfish thing. This has nothing to do with what I do every day, but I worry about the future for neurosurgery now.
Well, with God as my witness, we did not plan that, although I seem to have teed you up perfectly for that with my self criticism about my angio numbers. But if this is a priority for you in 2025, you, Dr. Stark, we will obviously use this platform in whatever way we can. And I seem to be the ideal subject for your initiative because I want to do spine surgery, trauma surgery, and I'm struggling to get myself into the angio suite. So,
Can I give you 2 other pieces of information that the public should hear about?
yes.
At that same meeting in Houston, I was at the president's reception with Alex Kalesi, who was the CNS president, who's an
Mhm.
endovascular surgeon, right? And I went around the room, talking, meeting young people, residents around the country, mostly mid-level residents that would get mid or high level, right? PGY4 and up that would actually end up at the president's reception. And no less than 25 people talked to me, and I probably only talked to 100 people, said they're going to do a skull-based fellowship. 2 years.
Mm,
Now, you and I both know there aren't a ton of jobs in that arena, right?
right.
They're not talking about vascular, endovascular, but they want to do something similar, which is skull base. And then the other conversation that came up with all of this was that they're saying now that there's no jobs for endovascular neurosurgeons. Now,
Interesting.
of course, there's work to do, right?
Yeah.
But smart people listening can start to circle this square with me and understand what the real message is here. And if we don't address that message, the answer is we will be out of the field potentially, right? Because no neurologist is going to do stroke all their career to say, well, I don't do aneurysms or AVMs. They're not going to do that for 30, 40 years. They're just going to come for the other stuff.
Right.
So I'm saying a lot of different things because the environment's complicated. But for the young people out there listening, we need solutions. This is your future. Even JP is going to be retired before this really, really hits bad. And he's going to be doing spine and trauma, so he's going to be good. But I think that we need to have some conversations on this podcast about potential solutions, about how we address this, about how we deal with the expectations maybe of our trainees so they understand that this is part of neurosurgery.
And we'll check back at the end of 2025 and see what progress has been made. For myself, I think that this past year, finishing the academic year is always staggered from the true calendar, but I'm now halfway through my first year as a senior resident where I'm chief a lot of the time, not just filling in here and there. And I have noticed in myself an impatience with the junior residents. I'm getting further away from them, and so it's harder to relate and harder to remember what it's like to be that new. Even if I can intellectually, it's harder to feel it. And oddly, perhaps more so than any other point in my residency, I have something to look forward to when I come home. It's most of residency is just work, 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 and now I actually look forward to going home, and I have stuff to do and things, and a life to look forward to outside of work. And so coming into work in the morning, and then especially at the end of the day when I'm responsible for the service, I have to sign out and get run through our list before I go home. The temptation to just get through it as quickly as humanly possible and get out of there, that temptation is so great. And so it's easy to gloss over a lot of the opportunities to slow down and teach the juniors something, be it some simple intern level fact about neurosurgery, how to do something, why we're doing something for a patient, or like hospital specific stuff like, oh, this would be a better way to handle that in the future, or even just pay attention to them as people. I see myself this year slowly losing my patience for all those variety of reasons. And so going into 2025, as I finish out this year of residency, doing some chief work at the main Rush Hospital as well as mostly at the county hospital, and then starting PGY7, where I'll be a chief at Rush for the whole year. I'm going to endeavor to keep some of that patience, and kind of like you said last year, with taking the extra time to talk to people, to do that with my junior residents, and take the extra time to um, remember what it's like to be them, and also to teach a little bit more, however that might manifest in each moment. So if any of them are listening, I'm sure they're snorting and calling me an asshole right now, but we'll see if I could do a little bit better in 2025.
Well, on that note, I do want to thank our listeners. Our listeners are largely doctors, surgeons, uh, even reps or medical students, and thank you for everything you've done in 2024, helping patients, teaching, doing research, taking care of people clinically. What we do is very, very important. I wish you guys all a happy new year and look forward to a great 2025.
Yeah, thank you all, everyone listening. And just for a real quick, the things that you've enabled us to do in the past year alone. We had our first truly sponsored series from Electa, the makers of Lexell's Gamma Knife, who were good enough to sponsor a series with us talking about their technology and functional neurosurgery. Look forward to more content and another series with them coming in 2025. We had a number of great series that Dr. Wang was kind enough to indulge me by doing our series on good and evil, where we really got out there from the norm for this podcast, launched our website with that, launched our video side of things. This latest quasi series we're doing talking about movies. These are all just things that I want an excuse to talk about with you and our friends on the show that you indulge me with. And I think they turn out to be pretty fun. So look forward to more video content coming in 25, and hopefully more expansion of the website and our online presence. And then finally, as I was saying before, we have so much fun talking to our men and women who have served in the military, because they're specialists and we're specialists. And so I've been thinking about this new tack we might take in this coming year, where I'm going to try to set up conversations with us to talk about really out there other specialists, be they engineers, authors, journalists, a priest, just someone who has a discipline, has a profession, but that's completely foreign, not just to surgeons, but not even in medicine, and just see if we can find some common ground and talk about what is it like to devote your life to something, to pursue a profession, a training, a discipline, and see if we can find that common ground. And none of this is possible without all of you watching and listening. Thank you for what, 5.5 years now of putting up with Dr. Wang and I ranting, and we look forward to you staying with us coming into 2025. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year coming at you soon.